Let me introduce Rick to give you some of the sort of the political background and also what he knows about what's going on in the country. Rick? Super.
Thank you, Floyd, and thank you all. One note, if you want to learn more about this, please join me at my class, INTS 4497, here at the Korbel School. It's International Campaign and Human Rights Management, and I welcome all students who may be interested in this subject as well as campaigns and political campaigns in the international sphere. But today I want to talk a bit briefly about the United States. And I'm going to try to talk a bit about the presidential campaign in the sense that what we see in the presidential campaign today, particularly as it regards Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, we can see some of the antecedents of the political behavior in support of those two candidates in the marijuana initiative of 2012 in Colorado, as well as in Washington State. So what do I mean? Well, let's begin with demographics. It's appropriate that it's mannish boy because it is men that support Bernie Sanders and the marijuana initiatives. Let's begin with that. And with Donald Trump as well. That younger men fueled the marijuana legalization effort in 2012. And one of the more interesting developments was that marijuana legalization on the ballot in Colorado and in Washington and in Oregon increased turnout among 18 to 30-year-olds by close to 10% over 2008. So, yes, this is one of the few initiatives or referenda that actually brings people out to vote, is marijuana. Hence why you see some of these initiatives being placed on the ballot in somewhat critical states, although California is probably so highly democratic it wouldn't make any difference. But first of all, you have age. Second of all, you have gender, men, supportive of marijuana and Trump and Bernie Sanders. And then, interestingly, particularly among Trump, and this is one of the few things that people never really understood, age 60-plus voters, highly supportive, particularly of medical marijuana. And 60-plus voters are very much supportive of Donald Trump. Messaging, very simple, anti-establishment. One of the key moments of the Colorado initiative in the fall of 2012 was when there was a radio spot went on the air with Governor Owens, former Governor Owens, and former Governor Ritter doing an ad that was, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, we don't normally agree on things, but this time we agree that you should vote no on Amendment 64. Okay? What do you think happened? The yes vote goes up. Why? Because voters don't like to be told by politicians what to do. They don't like politicians telling them how to vote. Take a look at every time Hillary Clinton or even Marco Rubio hauls out another elected official as an endorsement. What happens to Donald Trump? He goes up. Look at Bernie Sanders. He goes up. Why? Because voters don't want to hear from these folks. They screwed it up. So why should they be telling us what to do? And that's part of the key messaging of marijuana, which was, it isn't working. Prohibition of marijuana isn't working. And we need to do something differently. Change or stay the same. And in this case, voters wanted change. And marijuana symbolized that. And so you look at, the messages of Sanders and Trump. We need to change. We need to do something completely different, similar to marijuana in 2012. We need to have a conversation. This isn't working. We're putting away people who are holding maybe an ounce of marijuana for 5-10 years. We've got to find something different. And the way to do it is to legalize it. But the moment you said legalize it, what happens? Voters immediately leap back and go, oh no, we don't want to do that. So you have to put it into context of something they're familiar with. And in this case, it was legalized marijuana, regulated like alcohol. The moment you put it in that frame, voters said, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now I know how this is going to work. And more importantly, we're going to tax it. You know, everybody said in 2011 when we were drafting the language, and I said, we need to put the taxing up front. And everybody goes, oh, you can't do this. People get so scared of taxing. I said, no. What does taxation mean? Any of you who've ever filed an income tax, it means regulation. There is some structure involved. And the more that we could assure voters that there would be regulation and that there was an authority that would be overseeing the activity of the dispensaries, i.e. taxation authorities, revenue authorities, the greater assurance we are able to give voters. And so when you hear Bernie Sanders saying Medicare for all instead of single payer, that's a matter of using language to give security to voters based on something they already know, which is Medicare. So again, this is a matter of using language. Even when Bernie Sanders talks about Sweden and Denmark, some voters actually know what that means in terms of socialism. Other voters, not so much. But this is the frames that we're headed to, which is giving the voters an idea of something familiar and connecting it with an ideological or policy prescription as it relates to marijuana. What does this mean, though, for marijuana legalization in 2016 and future? First of all, this wave may be minor stalled in Ohio last year in 2015, and that is in large part because the language that they wrote for the initiative fundamentally didn't make a lot of sense. It was a badly written initiative that didn't have support from a lot of the marijuana activists, as well as when you put something on the ballot in an off year, you are not going to get younger voters to come out and vote, even if it is for marijuana. So that was both a tactical and a content mistake. I don't see those similar mistakes, at least in California, where groups have come together around one initiative finally. You don't see it in a couple of the other states. Arizona is not as well constructed as I think many would like. But what you're seeing is increasing activity to legalize marijuana over the next, I would say, 4 years. I think probably by 2020 you will start to see legislatures vote for legalization as opposed to just going through the ballot initiative stage. Why? Because they look at Colorado and they see that Colorado had $1 billion of revenue, of sales, $1 billion of sales. In 2011, when I did the first estimates of sales and tax revenues, I went to one of the fiscal analysis people in the state and I said, look, it's going to be a $500 million industry here. And this guy said, oh, no, no possible way. And yet, it's turned out to be twice the amount that we projected. And when there's revenue, it's funny. State capitals start to pay attention. Maybe that's not such a bad idea, because we can get 30, 40, 50, 80, $100 million in additional revenues as a result. Right now, their citizens are coming to Colorado and spending their money on marijuana here. If I'm a governor of another state, I might be very interested in keeping that money here at home. And finally, let's not put U.S. in isolation. You're seeing Canada with Trudeau basically saying, hey, I think we should legalize it. You're seeing, obviously, Uruguay. Now, Uruguay was very interesting because you could possess marijuana in Uruguay. You just couldn't grow it or sell it. And you'd actually walk down the streets and see people, smoking up bud right there on the streets. They were possessing it. I actually smoked a joint with the equivalent of the Attorney General of Uruguay. Why? Because we were possessing it. We weren't selling it. We weren't growing it. We were just there. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly legal. But their law changed so that there's now a controlled regulatory system for both growing, selling, and now, obviously, consumption. But you also have changes in Jamaica, you have changes in Spain, you have the European Union slowly moving. The UK is at least talking about it, which is a big change from 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So the conversation is occurring, and as we look at the presidential campaign, take a look at the themes and messages of the candidates, and you'll see how much they were sort of reflected in what happened here in 2012. Floyd?
Great. Thank you. I had no doubt that he could work the presidential campaign into it, and a good job too. And as you can see, a fairly optimistic view from the point of view of it passing in a lot of jurisdictions over the next 4 years or so, and in some case gaining momentum that the legislature looks at it for the sake of income. Now, sort of like gaming, however, as you know, when you reach a certain saturation, at least some of our income is obviously from folks from out of state coming here and purchasing, and we will, once it gets very competitive with some neighboring states, we might lose some of that income. But nonetheless, I think you heard what. Given that we've just had 10 years of an incredible public policy movement here, the likelihood that we're going to continue to see a lot of additional movement, particularly given how many places are going to vote for it shortly. And when California, should it pass in California, and the polls there indicate that it's close, but the political establishment seems to be reasonably lined up to pass it. It will spend an incredible amount of money. As you know, that's a percentage of the entire country's population, so it really makes a difference.